We'd identify who is taking those shots. The radio static cut through the screams of the wounded in the valley below. Lieutenant Commander Hatcher pressed his back against the crumbling mud wall, dust raining down from the impacts of heavy machine gun fire. Command, this is Bravo 1. We have an unknown shooter at the North Clock Tower. They are dropping tangos at 300 meters. Precision fire. Friendly. We don't have friendlies up there, Command. We left Vance at the rally point. The rally point is a crater. Hatcher risked a glance over the parapet. Through the haze of white phosphorus and settling dust, he saw the flash from the clock tower. It was a rhythmic, agonizingly slow cadence. Crack, pause, grind, crack, binoculars up, focus. Hatcher's breath hitched. The figure in the tower wasn't bracing the rifle. The rifle was wedged against a rebar stump. The shooter was slumped sideways. Visual! I have visual on the shooter! Hatcher choked out, his voice cracking. It's Vance! She's... Jesus Christ! Status on Vance? She's wounded. Her left arm... It's gone, Command. It's just gone. Hatcher watched in horrified fascination as the woman in the scope leaned forward, clamped her jaw onto the bolt handle of the M2010, and jerked her head back violently to cycle the round. Blood smeared the stock. She's reloading with her teeth, Hatcher whispered. She's clearing the path. Silence. 6 hours earlier, Forward Operating Base Keystone. Objective: establish the friction between Vance and the SEAL team and the foreboding nature of the mission terrain. Conflict: professional dismissal. Vance is seen as an unwanted oversight element. Military detail: M2010 Enhanced Sniper Rifle, ESR. ROE: strict self-defense, PID required. Stakes: if Vance cannot integrate or prove value, the team may ignore critical intel. Turning point: Vance spots the anomaly, Hatcher dismisses it. Beat: Vance's internalized resentment of being managed by lesser tacticians. Setting: the cargo bay of a C-130 Hercules. Loud, vibrating, cold blue light. The vibration of the C-130 Hercules didn't rattle Chief Warrant Officer 2 Elara Vance. She sat on the edge of the webbing seat, her spine distinct from the nylon backing, a statue amidst the restless energy of the Tier 1 operators around her. She checked the bolt of her M2010 Enhanced Sniper Rifle for the third time. It was a ritual, not a necessity. The .300 Winchester Magnum platform was clean, cold, and heavy in her hands. It was the only thing on this bird that didn't look at her with skepticism. Check your spacing, gentlemen. Wheels down in 20. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Hatcher, the OIC of SEAL Team Bravo. He was a block of granite with a voice like grinding gravel. He moved down the line of his men, checking harnesses and weapon lights. He stopped when he reached Vance. He didn't check her harness. He just looked at the patch on her shoulder, an indistinct unit designator that screamed Intelligence Support Activity without actually saying it. "Chief," Hatcher said, his voice dropping an octave to cut under the engine drone. "You comfortable?" "I'm operational, Commander," Vance replied, her voice flat. She didn't look up from her optic covers. "Look, I read your file. Kandar Valley, 2018. Impressive work." Hatcher leaned in, one hand on the cargo netting. "But this is a snatch and grab. High speed, low drag. We don't need an Overwatch element dragging a 20-pound long gun slowing the stack." Vance finally looked up. Her eyes were gray, mirroring the steel hull of the aircraft. "My ROE is specific, sir. I advise on terrain, and I provide counter-surveillance. If you're moving fast enough, you won't even know I'm there." "That's the problem," Hatcher muttered, straightening up. "I like to know where all my pieces are." He walked away, dismissing her. Vance felt the familiar sting, the assumption that she was a liability, a diversity hire, or a spy from high command sent to critique their trigger discipline. She suppressed the urge to defend her record. The mountains didn't care about resumes. She pulled the laminated map from her thigh pocket. The target area was a village called Al-Mir, nestled in a throat of the mountain range that locals called the Devil's Gum Line. "Hey, Chief," the whisper came from the operator next to her. A younger guy, call sign Rook. He gestured to the map. "You staring a hole in that for a reason?" Vance tapped a grid square north of the village. "Topography," she said softly. "Satellite shows this ridge is solid rock, but the thermal gradient from last night suggests loose shale. If we exfil north, we'll be slow." Rook frowned. "Intel said north is the primary extraction route, hard ground." "Intel is looking at photos." "I'm looking at heat," Vance said. "Shale holds heat differently than granite. If we run north under fire, we slide. We become targets." Rook looked at Hatcher's back, then back to Vance. He didn't say anything, but the doubt flickered in his eyes. He trusted the dossier, not the woman holding it. "1 minute," the loadmaster screamed, holding up a single finger. The red interior lights flooded the bay, turning the men into silhouettes of demons. Vance secured the rifle case. The ramp began to lower, revealing a swirling abyss of black clouds and freezing wind. The smell hit her instantly, ozone and impending violence. Vance stood up. She felt the weight of the gear, the familiar ache in her knees, and the sharp clarity that always came before the jump. Hatcher signaled the team. They began to shuffle toward the gaping maw of the ramp. As Vance fell in line at the rear, Hatcher keyed his comms, audible only to the team frequency. "Bravo, actual to all elements. Stick to the plan. PID on all targets. Watch your sectors, and keep an eye on the tourist. If she falls behind, we do not compromise the package to wait." Vance heard it. She didn't flinch. She adjusted her headset, tightened her grip on the rifle case, and stepped into the void. The landing was harder than the briefing had promised. The wind shear in the valley throat grabbed Vance's canopy at the last 100 feet, slamming her boots into the scree with enough force to rattle her molars. She rolled, collapsing the chute instantly, burying the silk under loose rocks before the thermal signature could register on any hostile optics watching from the peaks. She lay still for a count of 10. Silence. The cold here was a physical weight, pressing through her layers. It was the kind of cold that made metal brittle and fingers clumsy. Vance activated her PVS-31 night vision goggles. The world washed out in white phosphor monochrome. 50 meters away, green strobes pulsed IR signals. The SEALs were rallying. Vance moved to join them, her M2010 slung across her back, an MP7 submachine gun in her hands for the close quarters movement. The ground beneath her boots crunched loudly. Shale, she thought, a grim satisfaction tightening her chest. Just like the heat map said. "Bravo actual, all birds down." Hatcher's voice ghosted over the comms, barely a whisper. "Move to phase line Alpha. Clock is running." The team moved like a single organism, a predator sliding through the dark. Vance took the rear guard, the tail gunner position. It was the place for the slow or the untrusted. She kept her eyes on the ridgeline, scanning the high ground that loomed over them like the walls of a grave. 10 minutes into the patrol, the unease started to itch at the back of her neck. It wasn't what she saw, it was what she didn't hear. The Karakoram Range in summer should have been alive, even at this altitude. There should be mountain goats shifting on the rocks, wind whistling through the crags, the distant bark of village dogs sensing strangers. But there was nothing. The valley was a vacuum. Vance sped up, breaking the noise discipline of her spacing to close the gap with Rook. She tapped his shoulder and signaled for a halt. Rook froze, raising a fist. The column stopped instantly. Hatcher materialized from the darkness ahead, his face obscured by the 4-tube panoramic goggles that gave him the look of a giant insect. He didn't speak. He just tilted his head, demanding an explanation. Vance keyed her throat mic. "Too quiet," she breathed. "No wildlife. No dogs in the village. This valley has been sanitized." Hatcher looked toward the village, a cluster of mud brick heat signatures glowing faintly in the distance. "It's 0200, Vance. They're asleep." "Dogs don't sleep through a 12-man insertion," she countered, her whisper urgent. "The birds made noise coming in. If the village was normal, we'd hear barking. Someone cleared the area, or someone is keeping them quiet." "We have a schedule, Chief," Hatcher said, his tone dismissing the concern. "Unless you have a heat sig on a threat, we push. We are burning darkness." "Sir, I recommend we hold and launch a drone. Scan the ridges," Vance pressed. "If we walk into that bowl, denied. Drone buzz alerts the target. We maintain silence." Hatcher turned his back. "Move out." Vance stood there for a second, the frustration burning hot in her throat. It was the classic mistake of direct action teams, speed over situational awareness. They treated the environment as a backdrop, not a participant. She fell back into formation, but her grip on the MP7 tightened until her knuckles ached. She shifted her sector scan from the rear to the high cliffs on the left. The rock formations were chaotic, full of deep shadows where thermal imaging struggled to penetrate. Perfect for prepared positions. The team reached the outskirts of Almere. The mud walls rose up, forming a labyrinth of alleyways. The objective building was a 2-story compound in the center. "Bravo 2, take point! Breach in 3 mics!" Hatcher commanded. Vance stopped near a low wall, her job now to provide rear security while the kickdoor team went to work. She knelt in the dust, her senses dialed to the maximum. She watched a rusted weather vane on a nearby roof. It wasn't moving. No wind. She froze. The wind had been howling during the drop. Down here in the bowl, the air was stagnant. Displacement. "Actual hold," Vance said, breaking protocol. "The wind. It's blocked. There's something heavy blocking the airflow from the North Canyon." "Vance, clear the net," Hatcher snapped. "Breaching. Wait." The explosion of the breaching charge on the target door shattered the silence. The concussive thump rolled through the village. And then, the mountains answered. It wasn't an echo. It was the distinct, terrifying thwump, thwump, thwump of mortars leaving their tubes. Vance looked up. High on the ridge she had wanted to scan, 3 distinct flashes bloomed in the dark. "Incoming!" she screamed, her voice tearing raw. "Indirect fire! North Ridge!" The first mortar round didn't hit the team. It hit the extraction route behind them, the shale slope Vance had warned about. The explosion sent a landslide of razor-sharp rock cascading down, sealing the valley exit. "Contact front! Contact left!" Rook yelled as machine gun fire erupted from the empty windows of the village. It wasn't a snatch and grab. It was a kill box, and the lid had just been slammed shut. The world disintegrated into noise and pressure. The discipline of the stack vanished, replaced by the chaotic choreography of survival. Vance hit the dirt behind a crumbling stone trough as the air above her shredded. The snap hiss of supersonic rounds passing inches overhead sounded like angry hornets. The night vision was useless now. The muzzle flashes from the ridgeline and the village windows bloomed like supernovas, washing out the phosphor tubes with blinding halos. She tore the goggles off, letting them dangle by the lanyard. "Suppressing! Returning fire!" Rook screamed somewhere to her left. The chug-chug-chug of his MK-48 machine gun answered the enemy fire, a desperate rhythm trying to buy seconds. Hatcher's voice cut through the din on the radio, distorted by static and the concussive blasts of the mortars walking closer. "Actual to all elements! Collapsed perimeter! Get to the hard cover at the south wall! Move!" Vance scrambled up, staying low. The dust was thick, tasting of copper and ancient pulverized brick. She fired short, controlled bursts with her MP7 toward a second-story window where a muzzle flash flickered. A shadow crumpled. "They have the high ground," Vance yelled into her comms, though she doubted anyone could hear her over the roar of a detonation 10 meters away. "They're hurting us. The south wall is a kill zone." She saw the tactical geometry clearly, even through the panic. The enemy wasn't just shooting, they were funneling the seals. The mortars blocked the retreat, and the machine guns pushed them toward the only apparent cover, the south wall. But if they went there, they would be grouped tight for a single RPG to end them all. Vance looked right. A narrow alleyway led away from the kill zone, toward the steep drop-off of the ravine. It was exposed, but it offered a flanking angle. "Hatcher, don't go south!" she screamed, but the commander was already dragging a wounded operator toward the wall. She had a choice. Follow the order and die in the trap, or move to the flank and try to break the ambush. Vance broke right. She sprinted across the open street, dirt kicking up around her boots as rounds chased her. She dove behind a pile of rubble near the alley mouth, bringing her MP7 up. From this angle, she could see the enemy gunners on the rooftops that were pinning Hatcher. She squeezed the trigger. 2 bursts. 1 gunner fell. The fire on Hatcher's position slackened for a heartbeat. "Bravo taking effective fire from the east," Hatcher yelled. "Vance, where the hell are you?" "Flanking! I have eyes on—" The warning came too late. Vance saw the movement in her peripheral vision. On a rooftop directly across from her, a figure rose up, a long tube resting on his shoulder. RPG. The backblast kicked up a cloud of dust before the warhead even left the tube. Vance didn't have time to shoot. She didn't have time to run. She curled into a ball, turning her back to the threat, tucking her head. The rocket didn't hit her directly. It struck the base of the stone pillar she was using for cover. The world turned white. The concussion was a physical blow, like a sledgehammer to the chest. It lifted her off the ground, weightless and helpless. The breath was torn from her lungs. She felt the sensation of flying, tumbling through the air, debris, raining around her like hail. Then, the ground rushed up. She slammed into the slope of the ravine, the impact shattering the air from her body again. She didn't stop. She rolled, sliding uncontrollably down the steep shale face, her equipment snagging and tearing. Rocks slashed at her face and hands. Her rifle case slammed against her spine repeatedly. She tumbled for what felt like an eternity, the sounds of the battle above fading into a dull, underwater hum. Her slide ended abruptly against a protruding root system. The stop was sudden and violent. Pain exploded in her left shoulder, a hot, searing agony that eclipsed everything else. Vance lay there, staring up at the smoke-filled sky. The stars were gone. She tried to inhale, but her chest felt like it was encased in iron. She tried to move. Her right arm responded, groping the dirt. Her legs twitched. She tried to move her left arm, Nothing happened. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the shock. She turned her head, grit grinding against her cheek. Her left arm was there, pinned under a massive slab of masonry that had fallen with her. But it wasn't just pinned. The angle was wrong. The sleeve of her combat shirt was soaked dark, and the blood was pooling in the dust, black in the moonlight. Above her, on the lip of the ravine, she heard shouting in a language she understood too well. They were coming to check the bodies. She was alone. She was broken. And the war was just beginning. Pain was not a sensation. It was a frequency. It hummed in Elara Vance's teeth, a high-pitched vibration that drowned out the world. She lay in the dirt, the taste of copper and bile thick in her mouth. Assess. The word floated up from her training, a command from a distant instructor. Assess or die. She forced her eyes open. The ravine was a cauldron of shadows. Above, the rim was backlit by the flickering orange of the burning village. The sounds of the firefight were distant now, muffled by the depth of the drop. But there was a new sound, much closer, scuffing boots, loose shale sliding. Voices speaking Pashto, low and hunting, patrol, coming down. Vance tried to slide backward, to push herself deeper into the recess of the root system. Her body moved, but her left side remained anchored. A jolt of nausea folded her in half. She looked down. A slab of concrete, part of a collapsed lintel from the structure above, had landed squarely on her left forearm. It wasn't just pinned. The stone had pulverized the limb against the bedrock. She stared at it, her mind strangely detached. The sleeve of her combat shirt disappeared under the rock. Below the slab, she saw nothing. No hand, no fingers. Just the dark stain spreading rapidly into the thirsty earth, arterial. The diagnosis hit her faster than the fear. She was bleeding out. The cold creeping up her legs wasn't the night air. It was her blood pressure crashing. Stop the bleed. Her right hand moved with frantic, jerky speed. She clawed at the IFAC, individual first aid kit, on her belt. Her fingers, slick with dust and sweat, fumbled with the Velcro. Calm down, smooth as fast. She ripped the pouch open and pulled out the combat application tourniquet. She whipped it open, the black nylon strap dangling like a lifeline. She looped it over her left shoulder, sliding it as high up the arm as it would go, jamming it into the armpit. She cranked the windlass. 1 turn. The pressure bit into her bicep. 2 turns. The muscle bunched. 3 turns. The world grayscaled for a second, then snapped back. She locked the windlass in the clip and checked the Velcro strap, high and tight. The bleeding slowed. The immediate threat of exsanguination was paused, but the anchor remained. She was still trapped. The voices were closer now. 50 meters? 30? She saw the beam of a flashlight cut through the dust clouds uphill. Vance braced her feet against the root ball and pulled. She gritted her teeth so hard she felt a molar crack. She pulled until the tendons in her neck strained like steel cables. The rock didn't move. Her arm didn't slide free. She slumped back, gasping for air, her vision tunneling. The pain in her trapped arm was gone, replaced by a terrifying numbness. The nerve connection was severed. The bone was crushed. She looked at the flashlight beam again. It was sweeping the rocks, moving methodically toward her crash site. They would find her in less than 2 minutes. If she was still here, they would put a bullet in her head and drag her body back up as a trophy. She looked at her belt. Her knife, a fixed-blade Winkler, was still sheathed on her hip. Vance drew the blade. The steel was dark, non-reflective. She looked at where her arm went under the rock. The uniform fabric was tattered. Through the tear, she could see the ruin of flesh. The rock had done most of the work. It was a chaotic, crushing amputation. But there were still threads. Skin, uniform, perhaps a stubborn tendon, holding her to the dead weight. She didn't think about the act. She couldn't. If she thought about it, she would vomit, and the noise would kill her. She thought about geometry. She thought about physics. Object A is attached to object B, separate to initiate motion. She jammed the knife handle between her teeth to stifle the scream. She reached down with her right hand, gripping the knife again. She positioned the blade against the tattered connection point, right at the edge of the stone. She squeezed her eyes shut. Do it. She sawed. The sensation was distant, transmitted through the handle of the knife rather than her nerves. It was a wet, resisting toughness. She pushed harder, slicing through the heavy cordura of her sleeve and the remaining tissue. Something snapped. Vance threw her weight backward. She came free. The momentum sent her rolling back into the dirt, clutching the stump of her left arm to her chest. The pain that followed was blinding, white-hot and absolute. It wasn't the dull ache of the crush. It was the raw, screaming ending of a part of herself. She lay there, panting in shallow, sobbing gasps, fighting the urge to pass out. Stay awake. Stay awake or you die. The flashlight beam swept over the spot where she had just been. Vance scrambled backward, using her heels and her one good hand to drag herself into the deep fissure of the ravine wall. She wedged herself behind a cluster of fallen boulders, pressing her face into the dirt. The footsteps stopped. A pair of boots crunched onto the loose shale near the blood-soaked rock. A voice spoke, harsh and questioning. The beam of the light played over the slab, over the pool of blood, over the severed remnant trapped beneath. The man laughed. It was a cruel, satisfied sound. He shouted something up the hill. Dead, she guessed. She's dead. Vance held her breath. Her hand clamped over her mouth, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She watched through the crack in the rocks as the fighter kicked at the debris, then turned and began to climb back up toward the battle. They thought she was gone, a casualty of the fall. Vance waited until the sounds of their ascent faded. She looked down at herself. The tourniquet was holding. The stump was a dark, horrific shape against her chest. She had survived the fall. She had survived the patrol. But she was unarmed, save for a knife and a pistol she couldn't reload fast enough. Her M2010 rifle case was somewhere in the darkness, likely smashed. She tried to sit up. The world spun. The team. Hatcher. Rook. They were still up there. They were trapped in the kill box because she hadn't been fast enough to warn them. They were dying because she had failed. Vance looked up at the looming silhouette of the clock tower, an old ruins minaret that jutted out from the cliff face about 200 meters away. It overlooked the entire village. It overlooked the ambush site. It was a climb. A steep, brutal climb for a woman with 2 arms. For a woman with 1, it was impossible. Vance sheathed her knife. She checked the tourniquet one last time. Not dead yet, she whispered to the dust. She began to crawl. The recovery of the rifle was not a triumph. It was a burden. Vance found the drag bag 10 meters from her landing site, snagged on a cluster of dead roots that had stopped it from tumbling further into the abyss. The case was battered, the polymer shell gouged deep white by the shale, but the latches were intact. She grabbed the drag handle with her right hand. The weight pulled her shoulder down, threatening to overbalance her. 22 pounds. Before the fall, it was a manageable load. Now, It was an anchor. She looked up at the tower. It was a jagged finger of masonry pointing accusingly at the sky, a remnant of a mosque that had been old when the Soviets were here. The entrance was a dark archway at the base, accessible only by scrambling up a scree slope. "Move," she commanded her legs. They felt heavy, distant, like they belonged to someone else. The initial scramble up the slope was a study in agony. Without her left arm for balance, every slip of her boots sent her lurching sideways. She had to throw her center of gravity forward, compensating for the missing limb, using the rifle case as a crutch and a counterweight. She reached the archway, gasping, her lungs burning with the thin mountain air. Inside, the darkness was absolute. She fumbled for the small red light torch on her vest, clipping it to her collar. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a spiral staircase of eroded stone. The steps were narrow, steep, and covered in grit. Vance began the ascent. It wasn't walking, it was heaving. Step. Plant the right foot, lean, drag the rifle case up 2 steps. Bump. Repeat. Every time the case hit the stone, the sound echoed like a gunshot in the confined space. Vance flinched, waiting for a grenade to drop from above, but the tower remained silent. By the 2nd floor, the gray edges of her vision were closing in. The blood loss was catching up. Her body was shunting resources to her core, shutting down the extremities. Her right hand, gripping the drag handle, was cramping into a claw. She stopped, leaning her forehead against the cold stone of the central pillar. A wave of dizziness washed over her, seductive and warm. It told her to sit down, to close her eyes. Just for a minute. "If you sit, you don't get up," the analytical part of her brain whispered. "The team is dying." She forced herself to look through a firing slit in the wall. From this elevation, the battlefield was laid out like a tactical diagram. She saw the village of Almir burning. She saw the main street, the killing box she had predicted. Below, the thermal flashes of gunfire told the story. The SEALs were huddled behind the low wall of a dry fountain in the center of the square. They were completely surrounded. Enemy tracers were pouring in from 3 sides: the rooftops, the hotel windows to the east, and a heavy machine gun position in a bunker to the north. They weren't fighting to win anymore. They were fighting to breathe. Vance saw a green laser cut through the smoke, Hatcher's designator. He was painting the north bunker, screaming for air support that wasn't coming. The radio waves were likely jammed or the terrain was blocking the signal. "I see you," she whispered, her throat dry as dust. She pushed off the wall. The anger flared again, burning through the fog of shock. They were down there because they hadn't listened. And now she was the only variable the enemy hadn't accounted for. She resumed the climb. The stairs narrowed near the top. The debris became thicker: pigeon guano, broken bricks, spent casings from previous wars. Vance stumbled, her boot catching on a loose stone. She fell forward. Her instinct was to catch herself with her left hand. She threw the limb out. There was nothing there. Her chest slammed into the stone steps. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Her stump struck the edge of a riser. The pain was so intense, it didn't register as sound. It registered as a white flash that blinded her completely. Vance curled into a ball on the stairs, dry heaving, tears streaming down her dust-caked face. The rifle case slid down 2 steps, stopping with a mockery of a thud. She lay there for a long time. The darkness pulsed. "Get up." She clawed at the stone with her right hand. Her fingernails broke. She hooked her fingers into a crack in the masonry and pulled. She dragged her body up, inch by inch, slithering over the debris like a wounded snake. She grabbed the rifle case again. "Come on," she hissed through gritted teeth. 10 more steps. 5. The air grew colder. The smell of smoke became stronger. Vance pulled herself onto the final landing. The top of the minaret was open to the sky, the dome long since blown away by artillery. A low parapet wall, waist-high and crumbling, offered a 360-degree view of the valley. She collapsed against the wall, her legs finally giving out. She slid down until she was sitting in a pile of rubble, the rifle case across her lap. She was alive. She was high. She had the ground. She looked down at her left shoulder. The tourniquet was black with blood, but the flow had stopped. She touched the face of her watch. 0311 Zulu, 50 minutes since the ambush began. Vance popped the latches of the rifle case. The sound was crisp in the night air. She opened the lid. The M2010 lay inside, nestled in the foam. It was a beautiful machine. Long, sleek, lethal. A Schmidt & Bender 5-25X scope mounted on top. A suppressor screwed to the muzzle. She reached for it. She grabbed the pistol grip with her right hand and lifted. The barrel dipped instantly, the weight of the heavy barrel and suppressor dragging the muzzle down. She tried to bring her left hand up to support the forend. The phantom limb moved, but the rifle fell, the bipod clattering against the stone floor. Vance stared at the weapon. It was a bolt-action sniper rifle. It required 2 hands to operate effectively. 1 to shoot, 1 to stabilize, 1 to fire, 1 to cycle the bolt. She had 1 hand. She looked over the parapet. Below, an RPG slammed into the fountain wall, blowing a seal backward. The perimeter was shrinking. Vance grabbed the rifle by the scope, dragging it to the wall. She shoved the muzzle through a gap in the bricks. "Figure it out," she commanded herself. "Physics. Leverage. Figure it out." The M2010 enhanced sniper rifle was designed for precision, a tool of elegant geometry meant to extend a shooter's will out to 1,200 meters. But lying on the cold stone of the minaret, Vance realized the weapon was designed for a bipedal organism with 2 functional arms. To her now, it was just 14 pounds of uncooperative steel. Vance deployed the bipod legs with a chaotic fumbling of her right hand, locking them into the grit of the parapet wall. She lay prone behind the weapon, her chest heaving against the stone floor. "Build the position," her muscle memory chanted. "Bone support, muscle relaxation, natural point of aim." She jammed the buttstock into her right shoulder. Instinctively, her brain sent a signal to her left hand to reach back and squeeze the rear sandbag, to make the micro-adjustments needed for elevation. The signal went nowhere. There was no hand. There was no bag. The rifle's crosshairs danced wildly across the illuminated reticle. Without the support hand to stabilize the forend or the rear stock, the weapon was a seesaw. Every beat of her heart, hammered by blood loss and adrenaline, transmitted directly into the scope. The reticle jumped. Up, right, down, left. Below, the situation was critical. The enemy PKM gunner in the north bunker had established a rhythm. Brrrt. Pause. Brrrt. He was chipping away the cover of the fountain where Hatcher and the team were pinned. They were taking casualties. She could see the IR strobes on their helmets frantic, bobbing as they tried to drag someone deeper into cover. "Steady," Vance hissed, sweat stinging her eyes. She tried to load the bipod, pushing forward with her shoulder to dig the legs into the stone, but without an opposing force pulling the rifle back into her pocket, the weapon just slid forward. She had to shoot. Now. She trapped the stock between her shoulder and cheek, straining her neck to maintain a sight picture. The shadow in the scope was terrible. She couldn't get the proper eye relief. The image of the bunker was fuzzy, a green-tinted ghost. She centered the wavering crosshair on the muzzle flash of the PKM. Breath out. Pause. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle didn't bark. It roared. The suppressor cut the acoustic signature, but the physics of the .300 Winchester Magnum were undeniable. Because she couldn't pull the rifle tight into her shoulder pocket with a support hand, the recoil was a violent, unchecked slam. The scope rim kissed her eyebrow, splitting the skin. The rifle jumped off the wall, the bipod legs skittering sideways on the loose stone. Vance gasped, blinking blood out of her right eye. She frantically realigned the weapon, searching for the target. Did I hit him? She found the bunker in the glass. The PKM gunner was still there. He hadn't even flinched. The round had gone high and right, impacting the wall harmlessly, a wasted spark in the night. But she had changed the equation. The muzzle flash, though suppressed, had been visible from the angle of the rooftops. "Contact tower," a voice screamed in Pashto from the street, below. A string of green tracers arced up from the hotel window, hammering the side of the minaret. Debris rained down on Vance. She flinched, curling into a fetal position behind the low wall as bullets chewed at the masonry inches from her head. She had missed. She had revealed her position, and she had failed to kill the threat. Panic, cold and suffocating, wrapped around her throat. "I can't do this," she thought, the despair crashing over her. "I'm not a sniper. I'm a cripple with a gun." She looked at the rifle lying askew on the stones. It looked like a dead thing. She looked at her left shoulder, at the tourniquet that was the only thing keeping her alive. The reality of her disability wasn't a medical chart anymore. It was the difference between life and death for 12 men. Below, Hatcher's voice cut through the static on her earpiece, faint but distinct. "Bravo 1 to command. We are overrun. Tell my wife." The resignation in his voice snapped something inside Vance. It broke the panic. She sat up, ignoring the tracers snapping overhead. She wiped the blood from her eye with her sleeve. No. She wasn't going to die here because she couldn't hold a rifle like the manual said. The manual was written for whole men. She had to write a new one. She grabbed the rifle again. She looked at the environment, the rebar jutting out of the broken column to her right, the torn laces of her boots, the heavy canvas strap of the drag bag. She didn't need hands. She needed friction. She needed leverage. Vance dragged the rifle toward the rebar stump. She wasn't a soldier anymore. She was an engineer of violence, and she had a problem to solve. The green tracers from the hotel were still snapping overhead, but Vance ignored them. They were suppressing fire, high and wild. Her problem was the geometry of the rifle. She dragged the M2010 toward the jagged stump of rebar she had spotted earlier. It was a twisted finger of iron protruding from the ruined masonry, thick as her thumb. Vance reached down to her right boot. With clumsy, frantic fingers, she tore at the knot of her laces. She ripped the lace free, the nylon cord fraying at the ends. She pushed the forend of the rifle against the rebar. Using her teeth to hold one end of the lace and her right hand to loop the other, she lashed the barrel of the sniper rifle to the iron stump. She pulled the knot tight, biting down on the cord until her jaw ached, securing the weapon. It wasn't a perfect mount. It restricted her traverse to a narrow cone of fire. But it was a hard point. It replaced her left arm. Vance slid back behind the stock. She dug her toes into the debris, loading her body weight forward, pressing the rifle's bipod and the lashing against the rebar. She locked the buttstock into her shoulder, using the friction of her body to keep it stable. She found the scope. The picture was steadier now. The reticle settled on the north bunker. The PKM gunner was reloading. She could see the heat haze shimmering off his barrel. Target acquired. Vance inhaled. She squeezed the trigger. Crack. The rifle bucked, but the lashing held. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, bruising the bone, but the muzzle didn't jump off the wall. Through the scope, she saw the PKM gunner spin violently. A mist of pink vapor erupted behind him. He collapsed over his weapon, the belt of ammunition spilling uselessly into the dirt. "Won," she whispered. But there was no time to celebrate. A second figure was already stepping up to the machine gun, pushing the dead body aside. Vance reached for the bolt handle with her right hand to cycle the round. As soon as her hand left the pistol grip, the rifle dipped. The stock slipped from her shoulder pocket. The sight picture vanished. She cursed. To reload with her hand, she had to break her position. She had to unshoulder the rifle, rack the bolt, reshoulder, reacquire the target, and fire. That process took 6 seconds. In 6 seconds, the new gunner would fire 50 rounds into the seals. She needed to keep her hand on the trigger. She needed to keep the stock welded to her cheek. She looked at the bolt handle. It was a large, knurled knob of steel sticking out to the right side of the receiver, just inches from her face. Vance leaned forward. She turned her head sideways. She opened her mouth and clamped her molars onto the bolt handle. The cold steel tasted of oil and grit. She bit down hard, feeling the metal grind against her enamel. She jerked her head upward to unlock the bolt. Click. It unlocked. She whipped her head backward, using the muscles of her neck to drag the bolt to the rear. Grind. The spent brass casing flew out, spinning in the moonlight. She thrust her head forward, slamming the bolt closed with her jaw. Clack. A fresh round was chambered. Pain shot through her teeth and into her skull. She tasted blood. She had cut her lip on the receiver, but her right hand had never left the trigger. The crosshairs had barely moved. The second gunner was just bringing the PKM to bear. Vance fired. The round took him in the chest. He dropped. The rhythm was born. Clamp, jerk back, slam forward, fire. It was a grotesque, animalistic motion. It defied every manual on precision marksmanship. It was brutal on her body. The recoil battered her shoulder. The reloading battered her skull. But the rounds were flying true. Below, the enemy assault faltered. The rhythmic, precise fire from the tower was picking off the support teams. The volume of fire on the seals dropped. Vance spat a mixture of blood and saliva onto the stones. Her jaw was throbbing, her neck muscles burning with the strain of the violent motion. She watched the street. "Move," she whispered to the team below. "I bought you the gap. Move." She scanned the shadows. A RPG team was setting up in the alleyway. She leaned forward. She bit the bolt. She cycled the action. The sound of the bolt grinding against her teeth was the loudest thing in the world. It was the sound of her humanity stripping away, leaving only the weapon. She was no longer Elara Vance. She was a mechanism. The rhythm was a bloody metronome. Crack. The recoil slammed into Vance's bruised shoulder. Bite. The metal of the bolt handle ground against her molars. Jerk. Her neck muscles spasmed, pulling the bolt back. Slam. She thrust her head forward, chambering the round. Vance had stopped feeling the pain in her jaw. The adrenaline had flooded her system with a cold, numbing clarity. She wasn't fighting for her life anymore. She was fighting for the 12 heat signatures huddled behind the crumbling fountain below. Through the Schmidt and Bender scope, The battlefield was a series of mathematical problems. Distance, wind, lead. She saw movement in the alley to the east. 3 tangos moving to flank the SEALs. They were using the shadows, assuming the Americans were suppressed. They didn't know the tower was occupied. Vance shifted her hips, dragging the rifle's aim point. The lashing on the rebar held, but it groaned under the tension. She didn't aim for the men. She aimed for the structural column next to them. Crack. The round impacted the brickwork, sending a shower of high-velocity spalling into the alley. The 3 fighters dove for cover. Their advance halted. Below, the radio chatter in her earpiece was frantic. "Who is that? Is that Viper? Do we have air on station?" Rook's voice was breathless. "Negative." Hatcher's voice cut in, tight and controlled. "No air. That's a sniper. Single shooter. High angle. Friendly. They're killing the bad guys, aren't they? Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Prepare to move." Vance watched them. They were confused. They were looking up at the sky, expecting a drone or a helicopter. They couldn't conceive that the fire was coming from the ruined minaret, from the woman they had left for dead in the ravine. She needed to signal them. She couldn't speak. Her mouth was full of steel bolt handle, and her radio was transmit only, but she couldn't risk taking her hand off the trigger to key the mic. She used the gun. She fired 3 rounds in rapid succession at the heavy wooden doors of the hotel annex on the west side of the square, the only defensible building within their reach. Bang, bang, bang. Wood splintered. The door hinges shattered. The door swung open. Hatcher saw it. He understood the language of the bullet. "Target building marked," Hatcher yelled. "Alpha team bounding overwatch. Bravo team move. Go, go, go." Vance widened her sector of fire. As the SEALs broke cover, the enemy positions lit up. Muzzle flashes sparkled from the rooftops like camera strobes. Vance went to work. She didn't try for headshots. She didn't have the stability. She went for volume and suppression. She shot at windows. She shot at walls. She shot at anything that flashed. Bite, rack, fire, bite, rack, fire. A sharp crack echoed inside her skull. A molar on her lower right jaw shattered under the pressure of the bolt handle. A jagged shard of enamel cut into her tongue. Her mouth filled with the coppery taste of fresh blood, mixing with the dust. She spat a red spray onto the receiver of the rifle and kept shooting. The SEALs were moving fast, leapfrogging across the open ground. Rook laid down a stream of fire with the MK-48. 2 operators dragged a wounded man between them. They reached the hotel. The first man breached the doorway, checking the corners. Then the rest flooded inside, disappearing from the kill zone. Vance fired 1 last round at a figure trying to pursue them, dropping him in the doorway. Then she slumped forward, her forehead resting on the scope. The silence rushed back in, deafening after the roar of the 300 Win Mag. Her jaw locked up. Her neck felt like it was on fire. She was trembling uncontrollably, the shock of the blood loss finally piercing through the adrenaline. Below, safe inside the thick walls of the hotel, the radio crackled. "Secure. We are secure," Hatcher breathed. "Accountability check. All stations." Vance listened to the roll call. 11 voices, 1 wounded, stable. "What about the shooter?" Rook asked. "That was precision work, boss. Who the hell is up there?" Hatcher didn't answer immediately. Vance could imagine him moving to a window, raising his binoculars, scanning the ridgelines. "Command, this is Bravo Actual," Hatcher said. "We have an unknown element providing overwatch from the North Tower. Request identification of any Allied assets in sector." "Negative, Bravo Actual. You are alone in the box. No friendlies." Vance lifted her head. She looked at the blood smeared on the bolt handle. She looked at the empty space where her left arm used to be. She wasn't an allied asset. She was a ghost, and she was running out of time. The enemy knew where the shots were coming from now. The fire had been too consistent, the position too obvious. They had stopped shooting at the hotel. She saw movement at the base of the tower, shadows detaching from the darkness. They were coming for her. The silence in the tower was heavier than the gunfire. Vance leaned back against the cold stone of the parapet, her chest heaving in shallow, ragged hitches. The adrenaline was receding, leaving behind a cold, viscous dread that coated her insides. She checked the chamber. Loaded. Below, the village of Almir was momentarily quiet. The enemy fighters regrouping in the shadows of the bazaar, stunned by the precision fire that had dissected their assault. The reprieve gave the SEALs a heartbeat to breathe. Vance shifted her position, wincing as the movement pulled at the tourniquet. She brought her eye back to the scope. She focused on the second-story window of the hotel annex where the team had taken cover. She saw Lieutenant CMDR Hatcher. He was pressed against the window frame, his helmet removed, sweat and grime streaking his face. He held a pair of high-power binoculars to his eyes, scanning the ridges, searching for the phantom guardian who had paved their way with 300 Winchester Magnum rounds. Vance watched him. She felt a strange, detached intimacy. She was looking at the man who had dismissed her as baggage, the man who had ordered the team to move on when she fell. She didn't feel anger. She felt a profound, lonely utility. "Look at me," she thought, the words echoing in her skull. "See what is necessary." She saw Hatcher's binoculars sweep past the tower, then snap back. He had seen the muzzle. He was dialing in the focus. Vance didn't hide. She couldn't. She was wedged against the rebar, the rifle lashed in place, her body a broken counterweight to the weapon. In her earpiece, the radio transmission was crystal clear. "Command, this is Bravo Actual." Hatcher's voice was tight, trembling with a suppressed emotion. "I have visual on the shooter at the North Clock Tower." "Copy, Bravo Actual. Identify friend or foe." Hatcher didn't answer immediately. Through her scope, Vance saw his hands tighten around the optics. She saw his jaw drop slightly, the color drained from his face, leaving him pale beneath the camouflage paint. It's Vance," Hatcher choked out. The disbelief in his voice was raw. "She's alive." A chorus of confused whispers erupted on the team net. "Vance, she fell into the ravine. That's impossible." "I have eyes on," Hatcher insisted, his voice cracking. "But, Jesus Christ." "Status on Vance?" Command asked. Vance watched Hatcher lower the binoculars for a second, rubbing his eyes as if trying to wipe away a hallucination. He raised them again. He was looking directly at her injury. "She's wounded," Hatcher whispered. "Her left arm. It's gone, Command. It's severed at the shoulder. She's tied off." Vance closed her eyes for a second. The acknowledgement made the pain real again. The shame of the mutilation warred with the pride of the survival. She opened her eyes. She needed to be ready. The enemy wouldn't stay quiet forever. She leaned forward, gripping the bolt handle with her blood-slicked teeth to cycle the action, ensuring the round was seated perfectly. She jerked her head back. Grind. She slammed it forward. Clack. She spat the metallic taste from her mouth and resettled behind the optic. "Did you see that?" Rook's voice broke in, sounding sick. "Did you see how she cleared that malfunctions?" "She's not clearing a malfunction," Hatcher said, his voice hollow. "She's reloading. She's using her teeth to cycle the bolt. She's fighting one-handed." The silence on the net was total. It was the silence of men who realized their lives had been bought with a currency they couldn't afford to repay. Vance watched Hatcher stare up at her. He wasn't looking at a subordinate anymore. He was looking at a ghost who refused to haunt him until the job was done. "Vance?" Hatcher called out over the team frequency, abandoning protocol. "Elara, if you can hear me, give me a sign. Click the mic. Anything." Vance looked at the PTT, push-to-talk switch on her chest rig. To reach it, she would have to take her hand off the trigger. If she took her hand off the trigger, she lost her firing solution. If the enemy moved now, she would be too slow. She didn't move her hand. Instead, she shifted her aim slightly to the left, where a shadow was detaching itself from a rooftop overlooking the hotel. A RPG gunner, trying to get an angle on the window where Hatcher stood exposed. Vance exhaled. Crack. The round took the gunner in the hip, spinning him off the roof before he could fire. The RPG tube clattered to the street below. Hatcher flinched at the impact, then looked back at the tower. He understood. "She can't answer," Hatcher said softly. "She's busy keeping us alive." He turned back to his men inside the room. Vance couldn't hear what he said to them without the radio keyed, but she saw the shift in their body language. The slump of exhaustion vanished, replaced by a rigid, angry purpose. They weren't just extracting anymore. They were coming for her. But Vance knew something they didn't. She shifted her scope to the distant ridge, the high ground above her tower, a glint of glass, a flicker of movement that wasn't wind. She wasn't the only hunter in the valley anymore. The bullet arrived before the sound. It struck the stonework 6 inches from Vance's face, sending a spray of pulverized granite into her right eye. The crack of the supersonic snap followed a fraction of a second later, echoing off the canyon walls like a whip crack. Vance didn't flinch. She couldn't. Flinching required muscles she no longer had control over, and movement she couldn't afford. She squeezed her eyes shut, letting the tears wash out the grit, and froze. Sniper. She had seen the glint earlier, but the shot confirmed it. This wasn't a lucky spray from an AK-47. This was a deliberate, calculated shot from a high-velocity rifle. She traced the trajectory in her mind. High angle. Plunging fire. Coming from the ridgeline to the northeast. The Devil's Gum Line. She was in a duel, and she was already dead. A sniper's primary defense is invisibility. Their secondary defense is displacement. Shoot and move. Vance had neither. She was a static turret, bolted to a crumbling tower, bleeding out in the moonlight. She was the easiest target on the battlefield. She opened her streaming eye and brought it back to the scope. She scanned the ridge. It was a chaotic mess of shadows and jagged rocks, perfect for a shooter in a ghillie suit or local blankets. "Where are you?" She knew what he was doing. He was cycling his bolt. He was adjusting his windage. He had missed his cold bore shot by inches. The next one would be a correction. It would go through her skull. Vance looked at her M2010. It was lashed tight to the rebar. She could traverse maybe 10 degrees left or right. If he moved outside that cone, she was helpless. She had to make him shoot again. She had to see the muzzle flash to confirm his hide. She reached up with her right hand and unclipped her helmet. It was heavy, laden with the battery pack and strobe. She took a breath, holding the helmet by the chin strap. Bait the hook. Slowly, agonizingly, she lifted the helmet up, positioning it just above the parapet wall, 2 feet to the left of her actual head position. She wobbled it slightly, mimicking a weary soldier checking the perimeter. Bang! The shot was instantaneous. The helmet was ripped from her hand, spinning away into the darkness with a violent metallic clang. Got you. Vance didn't look at the helmet. She stared through the scope. She had seen it. A tiny, star-like blossom of fire deep in a crevice between two boulders, 700 meters up the slope. He was inside her cone of fire. Barely. Vance shifted her hips, muscling the heavy rifle to the right limit of the lashing. The nylon lace groaned, stretching tight. The crosshairs drifted toward the crevice. She was fighting the tension of the rope now. The reticle wanted to spring back to the center. She had to hold it there with pure brute force, locking her muscles against the recoil of the cord. She saw movement in the crevice. The shooter was confident. He thought he had killed her. He was shifting position, likely to get a better angle on the hotel. Vance inhaled. The pain in her jaw from the last reload was a dull throb, but the pain in her shoulder was sharp and screaming. She pushed past it. Wind check. No wind. Elevation. 700 meters. High angle. Aim low. She settled the crosshair on the dark void between the rocks. She squeezed. Crack. The rifle kicked hard against the tension of the lashing. The scope blacked out for a split second. When the image returned, the crevice was empty. Vance waited. Had she missed? Then she saw it. A rifle, a Dragunov, SVD, slid out from the rocks, tumbling end over end down the steep shale face. It clattered down the slope, followed a moment later by a limp, dark shape that ragdolled over a precipice and vanished into the shadows below. "Scratch one," she rasped. The relief was physical. It washed over her, making her dizzy. She slumped forward, resting her forehead on the receiver of the rifle. But the victory had a cost. The violent recoil against the taut lashing had loosened the knot on the rebar. The rifle was now sitting crooked, listing to the left. The bootlace was frayed, holding by a few threads, and her ammo. Vance looked at the open ejection port. The magazine was empty. She reached to her belt for a fresh magazine. Her fingers brushed canvas. Empty pouch. Panic flared. She checked the next pouch. Empty. She had dropped her gear during the fall. She had only one magazine left on her carrier, 5 rounds. 5 rounds of 300 Win Mag to hold off an entire company of insurgents. She pulled the fresh magazine. It felt terrifyingly light. She stripped the empty mag from the rifle and seated the fresh one. She leaned forward, opening her bruised mouth. She clamped onto the bolt handle. Jerk. Slam. She chambered the first of her last 5 rounds. Below, the sound of engines drifted up from the valley floor. Heavy engines. Diesel. Vance looked north. Through the smoke, she saw headlights cutting through the darkness. A truck. A technical with a mounted gun. And behind it, something heavier. An armored personnel carrier. They were bringing a breaching team. "Hatcher!" she whispered into the dead air. "You better hurry!" The vibration traveled up the spine of the tower before the sound fully registered. It was a low-frequency shudder that loosened the mortar between the ancient bricks, dusting Vance's shoulders with a fine gray powder. She pressed her good eye to the scope. The thermal image was grainy, swimming with the artifacts of her own failing optic nerve. She blinked hard, trying to clear the fog. It wasn't the lens. It was the blood loss. Her body was shutting down the non-essential systems, and apparently, high-definition vision was deemed non-essential. "Focus," she croaked. The word was a dry rattle. Down the main avenue, the beast emerged from the smoke. A BTR-80, an 8-wheeled armored personnel carrier. Its diesel engine roared, spewing black exhaust that mixed with the white phosphorus haze. Behind it, using the armored hull as a moving shield, a squad of 10 infantrymen advanced. They were heading straight for the hotel annex. Vance looked at the magazine in her rifle. 5 rounds. 5 rounds of .300 Winchester Magnum against 14 tons of steel and 10 Kalashnikovs. Do the math, she told herself. You can't kill the tank. The armor is too thick. You can't kill all the men. You don't have the bullets. The BTR's turret traversed slowly, scanning the buildings. The 14.5mm heavy machine gun mounted on top looked like a telephone pole. If it opened up on the hotel walls, it would turn the seals into paste. Vance needed to blind it. She shifted her aim to the driver's hatch. There was a small rectangular vision block, a periscope shielded by thick ballistic glass. It was a target no bigger than a smartphone, moving at 15 miles per hour on suspension that bounced. Stop the vehicle, stop the infantry, she whispered. She leaned forward. Her jaw screamed in protest as she clamped onto the bolt handle. The muscles in her neck were knots of agonizing tension. She didn't cycle it yet. The round was already chambered. She just needed to feel the cold steel against her teeth, a grounding wire for the pain. The BTR rolled over a pile of rubble, pitching forward. Vance exhaled. She tracked the vision block. Squeeze, crack, the rifle bucked. The shot went wide, sparking harmlessly off the sloped armor of the glacis plate. Damn it! Vance hissed. Her hands were shaking. The tremors of shock were making the reticle dance. 4 rounds left. The BTR kept coming. It was 200 meters from the hotel. The infantry behind it began to fan out, sensing victory. Vance forced herself to stop. She closed her eyes. She pictured the anatomy of the shot. She pictured the face of the driver inside that steel box, cramped, sweating, relying entirely on that narrow strip of glass to navigate the hellscape. She opened her eyes. She didn't fight the tremor, she timed it. The reticle dipped, rose, dipped, now, crack. The impact was immediate. The vision block shattered. A spiderweb of cracks turned the glass opaque white. Inside the beast, the driver must have panicked. The BTR swerved violently to the left, slamming into the corner of a mud brick shop. The collision tore the front wheel fender off and brought the vehicle to a grinding halt. The infantry behind it were exposed. 3, Vance counted. She leaned forward. Bite, jerk, slam. The taste of blood in her mouth was overwhelming now. She was swallowing it, choking on it. The enemy squad leader, a man shouting orders and pointing at the hotel, stepped out from behind the stalled armor. Vance put the crosshair on his chest. Crack. He dropped as if his strings had been cut. The remaining fighters scattered, diving into doorways, confused by the sudden halt of their armor support. 2 rounds left. The BTR engine was revving, the driver trying to reverse, trying to disengage from the wall. The turret began to spin. It wasn't aiming at the hotel anymore. It was traversing up. It was looking for the sting. Vance lay still. She had 2 bullets. The heavy machine gun on that BTR could fire 600 rounds a minute. Actual to Overwatch! Hatcher's voice crackled, urgent and terrified. Vance, that BTR is looking at you. Get off the wall. Move! Vance chuckled, a wet, bubbling sound. Move? She couldn't feel her legs. She was lashed to a piece of rebar with a bootlace. She was part of the architecture now. I can't, she whispered, not keying the mic. She watched the black hole of the 14.5mm barrel align with her position. She could see the rifling. She adjusted her aim, not at the vehicle, at the exposed optical sight of the gunner's turret. It was a desperate 1 in a million shot. She bit the bolt. Grind. Her vision tunneled down to a pinprick. The cold was gone. The pain was gone. There was only the gray circle of the scope and the black eye of the enemy. The world didn't end with a bang. It ended with a jackhammer. The BTR's heavy machine gun opened fire. The 14.5mm rounds didn't just chip the stone, they vaporized it. The top 2 feet of the parapet wall exploded inward, showering Vance with razor-sharp fragments of brick and ancient mortar. She didn't scream. The sound was sucked out of the air by the concussion. She curled into the tightest ball her broken body could manage, pressing her face into the dust, her one hand shielding her head. The rifle, lashed to the rebar, jumped and rattled violently, the bootlace fraying with every shockwave. Thump, 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 thump. The tower swayed. The floor beneath her cracked, a jagged fissure opening up near her boots. She was being disassembled, brick by brick. Covering fire, push, push, push! Hatcher's voice cut through the cacophony, distorted by the sheer volume of noise. Vance lifted her head just enough to peer through a gap where the wall used to be. Below, the heavy wooden doors of the hotel burst open. The SEALs weren't retreating. They weren't holding. They were charging. It was suicide. It was magnificent. Rook sprinted out first, a disposable AT-4 rocket launcher tube resting on his shoulder. He moved with a reckless, terrifying speed, sliding on his knees into the middle of the street, completely exposed to the enemy infantry. Behind him, 4 operators formed a line, their carbines barking in full auto, pouring a wall of lead into the alleyways to suppress the enemy fighters. They were doing this for her. Vance saw an enemy gunman pop up from behind the burning wreck of the shop, his AK-47 leveling at Rook's back. Rook was focused on the BTR. He wouldn't see it. The rest of the team was engaging targets to the left. No. Vance grabbed the M2010. The scope was cracked, a spiderweb fracture across the top lens, but the center was clear. She ignored the 14.5mm rounds, tearing the air above her head. She found the gunman. She leaned forward. Her mouth was a ruin of blood and broken enamel. She didn't care. She clamped onto the bolt handle. Jerk, slam. She tasted bile. She centered the crosshair on the gunman's head. Crack. Round 4. The gunman's head snapped back. He collapsed before he could pull the trigger. Rook stabilized himself. He cleared his backblast area, or he didn't care. He squeezed the firing mechanism. Whoosh. The rocket left the tube, a streak of fire and smoke. It crossed the 100 meters in a heartbeat. The impact was dead center on the BTR's turret ring. The explosion was blinding. A fireball erupted from the vehicle, blowing the heavy machine gun skyward. Secondary explosions rippled as the ammunition inside cooked off. The metal beast groaned and settled into the mud, burning. The firing stopped. The sudden silence was ringing. "Target destroyed!" Rook yelled, tossing the empty tube aside. Moving to the tower. Go! Go! The SEALs were sprinting toward the base of her minaret now. They were cutting through the smoke, stepping over bodies, driven by a singular, frantic purpose. Vance slumped back against the debris. She checked the rifle. 1 round left. She felt the vibration again. Not from a vehicle this time. From below. Voices, shouting in Pashto. Loud. Close. They were inside the tower. The enemy infantry hadn't just been outside. A sapper team had breached the ground floor entrance while the BTR provided cover. They were setting charges to bring the whole structure down. Vance looked at the crack in the floor. She could hear them running up the stairs. The SEALs were at the door outside, but the enemy was already halfway up the spiral. She had 1 bullet. She had no grenades. She had a knife. "Come on," she whispered, her voice a wet slur. She dragged herself to the stairwell opening. She couldn't stop them, but she could make the price of admission expensive. The war was fighting itself inside the stairwell now. Vance could feel the vibrations of the close-quarters battle rising through the stone floor beneath her. The sharp, suppressed poof of the SEALs' carbines clashing with the chaotic, booming reports of AK-47s. Rook and the others were fighting their way up, chewing through the sapper team that had come to bury her. She was disconnected from it. That was their fight. Vance lay amidst the rubble of the parapet, her body a hollow shell. The pain was gone, replaced by a cold, drifting numbness that started in her fingertips and was creeping toward her heart. Her vision was a tunnel of gray static, the edges of the world dissolving into nothingness. She looked at the rifle, one round. The brass casing glinted dully in the starlight. One left. She pulled herself up to the scope one last time. She didn't look at the burning BTR. She didn't look at the hotel. She scanned the perimeter of the village, looking for the mind behind the machine. She found him. 600 meters to the north, near the mouth of the ravine she had fallen into. A cluster of men were moving rapidly toward a waiting SUV. In the center, a man in a black shalwar kameez was gesturing wildly, holding a radio handset. He wasn't fleeing. He was coordinating the anti-air batteries on the far peaks. He was setting up the trap for the medevac bird that was undoubtedly inbound. If he lived, the helicopter would burn. Vance tried to shift the rifle. It wouldn't move. The lashing had tightened, or maybe her muscles had simply ceased to function. She had to drag her entire body to the right, sliding through the blood and grit to align the barrel. She groaned, a sound that was more animal than human. She wedged her shoulder behind the stock. The target was moving. He was stepping toward the vehicle. In 3 seconds, he would be gone. Range, 600. Moving target. Lead, 2 mils. She couldn't steady the crosshair. Her heartbeat was thumping against the rifle stock, knocking the reticle off target with every pulse. Thump, sway, thump, sway. She needed a pause, a respiratory pause, but her lungs were ragged, gasping for air that wasn't there. Just one, she whispered. Her lips were split, swollen, tasting of iron. Just one more. She thought about the reload, the teeth, the grinding, the sheer impossible absurdity of it. She had turned herself into a machine to survive, but now, for this last shot, she needed to be a human. She needed will. The commander grabbed the door handle of the SUV. Vance stopped breathing. She forced her body to turn to stone. She ignored the black spots dancing in her vision. She ignored the sounds of the SEALs breaching the floor below her. She waited for the heartbeat. Thump. Between the beat. She squeezed. Crack. The recoil didn't just kick, it punished. With her body limp and her muscles spent, the rifle slammed into her shoulder with the force of a sledgehammer. The scope rim smashed into her orbital socket again, cutting to the bone. The world spun violently. Through the fading tunnel of the optic, she saw the result. The rear window of the SUV shattered. The commander crumpled against the doorframe, sliding down slowly, leaving a dark streak on the white metal. The radio handset dangled from his dead hand. The remaining fighters froze, leaderless, their coordination severed. Vance didn't cheer. She didn't move. The darkness that had been waiting at the edges of her vision rushed in like a tide. The cold reached her heart. She let go of the rifle. Her head slumped forward onto the stone. The last thing she heard wasn't the wind or the gunfire. It was the sound of boots on the stairs and a voice screaming her name. Elara! Then silence. The breach of the tower's upper landing was a violent intrusion. Hatcher kicked aside the remnants of the wooden trapdoor, his weapon raised, scanning the gloom for threats. Behind him, Rook and the team medic, Doc Salyer, flooded the small, debris-choked platform. There were no enemies here. There was only the wind, the smell of cordite, and the small, broken figure slumped against the crumbling parapet. "Clear!" Hatcher barked, though the word felt heavy in his throat. "Doc, get on her!" Salyer didn't need the order. He was already sliding across the stone floor, his medical bag ripping open as he moved. Hatcher slung his rifle and knelt beside Vance. She looked like a casualty of a much older war. The dust of the explosion had coated her in a gray shroud. Her combat shirt was soaked dark on the left side, the fabric stiff with dried blood. Her face was unrecognizable, masked in grit, swelling, and fresh blood that had nothing to do with the amputation. "Pulse is thready," Salyer said, his voice tight. "She's cold, boss. She's shunting hard." Hatcher looked at the left arm. The tourniquet she had applied was a masterpiece of desperation, high, tight, and cranked until the windlass bowed. But below it, the limb ended in a jagged, traumatic ruin. "Get a line in," Hatcher ordered. "Fluids, now." "I can't get a vein in the arms, they're collapsed," Salyer muttered, ripping open an I.O. intraosseous kit. "Going into the sternum." While the medic worked to drill a line directly into Vance's bone marrow to deliver the life-saving hextend, Rook moved to the wall to secure the perimeter. He stopped, freezing as he looked at the rifle. "Commander," Rook whispered, "look at this." Hatcher looked up from Vance's pale face. He followed Rook's gaze to the M2010. The rifle was lashed to the twisted rebar stump with a frayed, blood-soaked bootlace. The knot was complex, tightened by the violent recoil of 33 shots until it was fused into a hard lump. The nylon was stretched to its breaking point, but it was the bolt handle that made Hatcher's stomach turn. The steel knob, usually matte black, was stripped to the raw metal. It was covered in deep, jagged scratches, and it was smeared with a mixture of saliva and blood. Hatcher looked back at Vance. He saw her mouth. Her lips were shredded. Her jaw was swollen, likely fractured. Several teeth were broken, jagged shards visible behind her parted lips. She didn't just clear a malfunction, Hatcher realized, the horror of it settling in his chest like a stone. She cycled every round with her teeth. She lashed the gun down because she didn't have a hand to hold it. Rook touched the rifle, his fingers ghosting over the scope, which was cracked and smeared with blood from her eyebrow. 33 confirmed kills, Rook said softly, with one arm, dying. She paved the road, Hatcher said. He reached out and gently touched Vance's shoulder. She paved the road for us. I have fluids pushing, Salyer announced. We need to move. This tower is structurally compromised. If the wind picks up, the rest of this wall goes. Pack her up, Hatcher commanded, snapping back into the role of the officer. Careful with the shoulder. Rook, you and Miller take the litter. We move slow. We move smooth. Do not drop her. They unfolded the collapsible litter. It took 3 of them to lift her dead weight onto the canvas. She weighed nothing, it seemed, just bone and gear. As they lifted her, something clattered to the stone floor. It was the empty brass casing of the final round, the one that had killed the commander. Hatcher bent down and picked it up. It was still warm. He put it in his pocket. Actual to Kingpin. Hatcher keyed his radio. Package secured. We are moving to the LZ. Status of extraction? Kingpin to Actual. Dusty 10 is inbound. ETA 2 mics. Pop smoke at the base of the tower. Copy. We are coming out. The descent was a nightmare of geometry. The spiral stairs were narrow and steep. Rook and Miller had to maneuver the litter with agonizing precision, sweating in the freezing air, while Hatcher and the rest of the team formed a protective bubble around them. Every step sent a shower of dust down the shaft. The building groaned, the damage from the BTR's cannon fire settling deep in its foundations. Easy, easy, Salyer cautioned constantly, watching the IV line. Keep her head elevated. They burst out of the archway at the bottom, just as the first gray light of dawn touched the peaks of the Karakoram. The valley was silent. The fires in the village were dying down to embers. The bodies of the enemy lay scattered across the square, a testament to the overwatch that had kept the team alive. The thwup, thwup, thwup of rotors cut the air. A Black Hawk helicopter banked hard over the ridge, flaring as it dropped toward the flat ground near the dry fountain. The wash kicked up a storm of brown dust. Go, move! Hatcher yelled, shielding his eyes. They ran the litter toward the open door of the Bird. The crew chief leaned out, waving them in. They slid the litter onto the deck. Salyer jumped in after it, immediately hooking Vance up to the onboard monitors. Hatcher paused at the door. He looked back at the tower. It stood like a tombstone against the morning sky, the top shattered, the single window staring down like a missing eye. He climbed aboard. Go! The helicopter lifted, banking away from Almir. Hatcher sat heavily on the bench seat, watching the medic work. He saw the flat line of the horizon tilting. Then he heard the beep. A steady, rhythmic beep from the heart monitor. Weak, fast, but there. Hatcher leaned his head back against the fuselage and closed his eyes. He could still hear the sound of the bolt grinding against teeth. It was a sound he knew he would never forget. The first thing Elara Vance noticed was the silence. It wasn't the heavy, predatory silence of the Karakoram Valley, nor the ringing silence that follows an explosion. It was a white, sterile silence. It smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. She opened her eyes. The light was harsh, fluorescent, humming with a frequency that made her headache throb. She tried to swallow, but her jaw wouldn't move. It was rigid, locked in place by wires and surgical steel. She panicked for a split second, the memory of the bolt handle grinding against her teeth flooding back. She tried to raise her hands to her face. Her right hand moved. It touched her cheek, feeling the bandages. Her left hand did not move, but she could feel it. She could feel the itch on her left palm. She could feel the cramp in her left pinky finger. She tried to flex it. Her eyes drifted down. The hospital sheet was flat on the left side of her chest. There was no mound, no shape. Just a clean, terrifying flatness that ended at the shoulder. The breath hissed through her wired teeth. Gone. The realization didn't come with tears. It came with a cold, mathematical finality. The equation had been balanced. She had traded the arm for the breath she was taking right now. The door to her room opened softly. Vance didn't turn her head. Her neck was in a brace, but she shifted her eyes. Lieutenant Commander Hatcher stood in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his dust-caked combat gear. He was in his service khakis, the ribbons on his chest perfectly aligned. He held a garrison cap in his hands, twisting the fabric slightly. He looked older. The lines around his eyes were deeper than she remembered from the cargo plane. He looked at her, then looked at the empty space on the bed, then forced his eyes back to hers. "Chief," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of the command authority he wore like armor. "The doctors said you were awake." Vance nodded, a microscopic movement. Hatcher walked into the room, pulling a plastic chair to the bedside. He sat down, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He looked at the floor for a long moment. "The team is back at Bragg," he said. "Rook, Miller, Doc, they're all fine. Minor shrapnel, some hearing loss. But they're walking." Vance watched him. She knew what he was doing. He was listing the ledger. He was telling her what she had bought. "We debriefed command yesterday," Hatcher continued. "The drone footage confirmed the kill on the HVT. The anti-air network in the valley is dark. You shut it down." He paused. The air in the room felt thick. "I tried to write the citation," Hatcher said, his voice cracking slightly. "For the Silver Star, maybe the Cross. I started typing it out. For conspicuous gallantry. For risk of life above and beyond." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. He looked up at her, his eyes wet. The words felt cheap, Elara. They felt like paperwork. They didn't say anything about the tower. They didn't say anything about the lace or your teeth. Vance wanted to speak. She wanted to tell him that it was the job, that the terrain had dictated the tactics, and she had simply adapted, that he would have done the same. But her jaw was wired shut. She couldn't absolve him. She could only listen. Hatcher reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small, heavy object and placed it gently on the bedside table, next to the plastic cup of water. It was a brass casing. 300 Winchester Magnum. The rim was dented. The neck was scorched. "Rook found this on the floor of the minaret," Hatcher said. "It was the last one, the 33rd. He stood up. He stood at attention, his posture rigid. "I know you can't answer me," he said softly. "But I need you to hear this. We are alive because of you. Every breath my daughter takes when I get home, that's yours. That's a debt I can't pay." He hesitated, then slowly raised his hand. He didn't salute her as an officer salutes a warrant. He saluted her slowly, holding the brim of his hand to his eyebrow, the gesture heavy with a respect that transcended rank. "Thank you," he whispered. Hatcher held the salute for a count of 3, then dropped his hand. He turned and walked out of the room, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving her alone with the white noise of the machines. Vance looked at the brass casing. It caught the fluorescent light, gleaming gold against the white laminate table. She closed her eyes. She could feel her left hand again, the ghost fingers wrapping around the grip of the rifle. She flexed them, and in the privacy of her own mind, she felt the trigger break. The war was over. The silence remained. But for the first time in 3 days, she slept without dreaming of the fall.